The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Blackthorn Mountains, carrying with it the scent of pine and the promise of snow. Within the towering stone walls of Castle Dunraven, the heart of the kingdom of Eryndor, a fire roared in the grand hall, casting flickering shadows across tapestries woven with tales of valor and betrayal. Sir Aldric Veyne, royal advisor to King Edwin III, stood near the hearth, his sharp gray eyes scanning the room. At 42, he was a man of lean build and weathered features, his dark hair streaked with silver, a testament to years spent navigating the treacherous currents of courtly politics. Tonight, however, the currents had turned deadly. The banquet had begun as a celebration of the harvest moon, a rare night of revelry in a kingdom teetering on the edge of war with neighboring Valcroft. Nobles clad in velvet and silk laughed over goblets of spiced wine, while minstrels strummed lutes and sang of ancient heroes. The centerpiece of the feast was the Crimson Chalice, a relic of gold and ruby said to have been blessed by the first kings, its presence a symbol of divine favor. It sat upon a dais, gleaming in the firelight, until it didn't. A scream had pierced the air, sharp and sudden, silencing the music. Lady Isolde, the king's cousin and a woman known for her viper's tongue, lay slumped over the high table, her emerald gown stained with blood. The chalice, moments before in her grasp, now rested on its side, wine pooling like spilled life across the oak. Aldric had been the first to reach her, his hand brushing the cold metal of a dagger buried in her chest. The blade bore no markings, but its craftsmanship spoke of wealth and intent. King Edwin, a broad man with a beard like iron, rose from his throne, his voice a thunderclap. "Find the killer, Aldric," he commanded, his blue eyes burning with fury and fear. "This is no mere murder. It's a strike at the crown itself." The room erupted into whispers as knights drew swords and ladies clutched their pearls. Aldric felt the weight of every gaze, the unspoken accusation that he, the king's shadow, should have foreseen this. He began his work at once, kneeling beside Isolde's body. Her lips were blue, her eyes wide with a terror that lingered beyond death. The dagger had struck true, piercing her heart, but the wine on her breath carried a bitter undertone. Poison, perhaps? Aldric's mind raced. Isolde had enemies aplenty, lords she'd insulted, knights she'd spurned, even priests who whispered she dabbled in forbidden rites. Yet this was no impulsive act. The Crimson Chalice, toppled but untouched by theft, hinted at a deeper design. The king's son, Prince Cedric, approached, his youthful face pale beneath a mop of golden curls. "She was to announce a betrothal tonight," he murmured, his voice trembling. "Mine, to the Valcrothian princess." Aldric's jaw tightened. A broken alliance could mean war. He glanced at the knights standing rigid along the walls, Sir Roland, broad and scarred, Sir Gavin, lean and hawk-eyed, Sir Torrin, young and restless. Any of them could wield a blade with such precision. Or perhaps the killer hid among the silk-clad nobles, their smiles masking venom. Aldric rose, the chalice catching his eye once more. An ancient prophecy flickered in his memory, half forgotten from dusty tomes. When the crimson spills, the kingdom falls. He pushed the thought aside. Superstition wouldn't solve this. He needed evidence, allies, and time, none of which he had in abundance. As the hall buzzed with fear and suspicion, he knew one truth: the murderer was still among them, watching, waiting. The grand hall of Castle Dunraven grew stifling as the night deepened, the air thick with the scent of roasted pheasant, spilled wine, and the metallic tang of blood. Sir Aldric Veyne moved with purpose, his boots silent on the stone floor as he slipped away from the chaos of the banquet. The king's command echoed in his ears: "Find the killer." But to do so, he needed more than instinct. He needed the castle's secrets, and those were buried deep. He descended a narrow stairwell to the undercroft, where the flickering torchlight danced across damp walls. The steward, Master Hugh, awaited him, a wiry man with a face like crumpled parchment. Hugh had served 3 kings and knew every crevice of Dunraven, from the hidden passages to the whispers of the scullery maids. "You've a devil's task, Aldric," he rasped, handing over a ring of iron keys. "The court's a nest of vipers tonight." Aldric nodded, pocketing the keys. "Who saw Isolde last?" Before the scream, Hugh scratched his stubbled chin. "The kitchen lad, Pip, said she'd been arguing with Sir Roland near the wine casks an hour before. Something about a debt unpaid. And Lady Morgana. Her maid swears she saw Isolde slip a note to Sir Gawain by the east window. Aldric filed the names away. Roland, the grizzled knight with a temper. Gawain, the cunning one who'd once challenged Aldric to a duel over a slighted honor. Both had means and motive. The Undercroft led to the castle's archives, a vault of scrolls and leather-bound tomes beneath the keep. Aldric lit a candle and began his search, his fingers tracing titles until he found the Annals of Eryndor, a chronicle of the kingdom's founding. The Crimson Chalice stared back at him from an illuminated page, its origins tied to a priestess who'd forged it from a fallen star. The text spoke of a curse. Should the chalice's bearer die unjustly, the land shall weep in shadow. Aldric frowned. Prophecy or not, the chalice's presence at Isolde's death was no coincidence. A noise, a soft scrape of leather on stone, snapped him from his thoughts. He doused the candle and pressed himself against a shelf, peering through the gloom. A figure emerged, cloaked in black, moving toward a locked chest in the corner. Aldric's hand rested on his dagger as the intruder knelt, producing a thin blade to pick the lock. The chest creaked open, revealing a glint of silver, a pendant shaped like a crescent moon. The figure pocketed it and turned, their face catching the faint light. Sir Torrin, the youngest knight, his boyish features taut with guilt. Aldric stepped forward, voice low. "Explain yourself, Torrin." The knight froze, then straightened, his hand twitching toward his sword. I lost it in a wager," he stammered. "It's my mother's. I couldn't let the king know." A lie, Aldric thought, but a practiced one. He let Torrin go, watching him vanish up the stairs. The pendant nagged at him. Moon symbols were tied to the old faith, banned since the reign of Edwin's father. Was Torrin a heretic or a pawn? Returning to the hall, Aldric found the mood darker. Prince Cedric paced near the throne, muttering about Valcroth's spies, while King Edwin interrogated a trembling minstrel. Lady Morgana, Isolde's rival in beauty and ambition, caught Aldric's eye from across the room. Her smile was a blade, sharp and cold. "You'll need more than old books to save us," she purred, brushing past him. Her sleeve grazed his hand, leaving a faint scent of hemlock, a poisoner's herb. Aldric's mind churned. Roland's debt, Gavin's note, Torrin's theft, Morgana's malice. Threads of a tapestry he couldn't yet weave. The chalice sat under guard now, its rubies dull in the torchlight. He needed to speak to the knights, but first the note Hugh mentioned. If it existed, it might hold a clue. As he moved toward the east window, a shadow shifted in the rafters, a watcher unseen. The game, he realized, was only beginning. The east window of Castle Dunraven overlooked a courtyard blanketed in frost, its stained glass casting fractured colors across the stone floor. Sir Aldric Veyne stood beneath it, his breath fogging in the chill as he searched for the note Lady Isolde had allegedly passed to Sir Gawain. The banquet hall hummed behind him, a hive of murmured accusations and clinking goblets, but here, the silence was a shroud. His fingers brushed a crevice beneath the sill, and there it was, a scrap of parchment folded tight. He unfolded it with care, revealing a hurried scrawl, "Meet me at the crypt. Midnight. The chalice is the key." No signature, but the ink smelled faintly of rosewater, Isolde's scent. Aldric tucked the note into his tunic, his pulse quickening. The crypt lay beneath the castle's chapel, a place of dust and bones where the first kings rested. If Isolde had planned a rendezvous there, it suggested secrets too dangerous for the hall's prying ears. But midnight had passed, and she was dead. Had Gawain met her and silenced her? Or had someone else intercepted the plan? He sought Sir Gawain next, finding him near the armory, polishing his longsword with a rag. The knight was lean and sharp-featured, his dark eyes glinting like a falcon's. "You've questions, Veyne," he said without looking up. "Ask them quick, I tire of this farce." Aldric held his gaze. "Did you meet Isolde tonight?" Gavin's hand stilled, then resumed its rhythm. "She tried to bribe me," he said coolly. "Wanted me to sway the king against Cedric's betrothal. I refused. She stormed off, muttering about keys and curses. That's all I know." Aldric studied him. Gavin's calm was too practiced, his words too neat. "And the note?" he pressed. Gavin's lip twitched. "Lost it. Wynne took it from my belt." A lie, Aldric wagered, but he had no proof yet. He left Gavin to his blade and turned toward Sir Roland, who stood by the hearth, a tankard of ale in his meaty fist. Roland's scarred face was flushed, his voice a growl as he argued with a squire. "Debt," he barked when Aldric approached. "Isolde owed me gold from attorney wager. She laughed it off, said I'd rot before she paid. Maybe I should have gutted her myself." The admission was bold, reckless even, but Roland's temper was no secret. Aldric pressed further. "Where were you when she died?" Roland shrugged. "Pissing in the garderobe. Asked the stable boy, he saw me stumble out. A thin alibi, but verifiable." Aldric thanked him and moved on, the note's words, "The chalice is the key," gnawing at him. He needed the crypt. The chapel was a somber vault of arched stone, its altar draped in black for mourning. A trapdoor behind the pews led to the crypt, and Aldric descended, the air growing cold and stale. Tombs lined the walls, their effigies staring blankly. At the center stood a plinth, empty save for a ring of dust where something, a chalice, perhaps, might once have rested. He traced the stone, finding faint carvings, a crescent moon and a star, symbols of the old faith. Torrhen's pendant flashed in his mind. Was this tied to his theft? Footsteps echoed above, heavy and deliberate. Aldric drew his dagger and hid behind a sarcophagus as Sir Roland's bulk filled the doorway. The knight carried a torch, his eyes scanning the dark. "I know you're here, Veyne," he rumbled. "Saw you skulk off. What's this about?" Aldric stepped out, weapon raised. "Answers," he said. "Did you kill her?" Roland laughed, a harsh sound. "If I had, I'd not be dumb enough to chase you down here. I came to warn you, Gavin's plotting something. Saw him with Morgana, whispering like thieves." Aldric lowered his blade, wary but intrigued. An alliance between Gavin and Morgana could shift the board entirely. "Why tell me?" he asked. Roland spat. "I hate them more than I hate you. Watch your back." He lumbered off, leaving Aldric alone with the dead. The crypt held no body, no blood, just riddles. The chalice, the note, the moon symbols, they pointed to a conspiracy older than Isolde's murder. But whose hand pulled the strings? The crypt's chill clung to Sir Aldric Veyne as he climbed back into the chapel, the echo of Roland's warning ringing in his ears. Gavin and Morgana, two serpents coiled in the shadows. If they were plotting together, Isolde's death might be but the first strike in a larger scheme. The Crimson Chalice, with its spilled wine and ancient prophecy, loomed ever larger in his mind. He needed to confront Lady Morgana, but first he sought the king. King Edwin sat in his private solar, a chamber of oak and iron overlooking the moonlit peaks. His broad frame slumped in a high-backed chair, a goblet of untouched wine in his hand. "What have you found, Aldric?" he growled, his voice rough with exhaustion. Aldric recounted the night's threads. Isolde's note, Gavin's denial, Roland's temper, Torrhen's theft, and now Roland's claim of a Gavin-Morgana alliance. Edwin's fist tightened around the goblet. "Morgana's always hungered for power," he muttered. "And Gavin, he'd sell his soul for a title. But murder? Prove it or we're blind." Aldric nodded, his gaze drifting to a tapestry on the wall. The first kings kneeling before the Crimson Chalice, a crescent moon above them. "The chalice, sire," he said. Isolde's note called it the key. "Does it hold some hidden purpose?" Edwin's eyes narrowed. "It's a relic, nothing more. My father purged the old rites tied to it, moon worship, blood offerings, folly and superstition." Yet his tone wavered, and Aldric sensed a crack in the king's certainty. He left the solar and tracked Morgana to the ladies' gallery, a balcony overlooking the hall. She stood alone, her raven hair spilling over a gown of midnight blue, her fingers tracing the rim of a silver cup. "Sir Aldric," she said without turning, her voice silk over steel. "Come to accuse me?" He stepped closer, catching that faint whiff of hemlock again. "Did you kill Isolde?" he asked bluntly. Morgana laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "If I'd wanted her dead, she'd have choked on her own spite years ago. No, I preferred her alive, humiliated, powerless." "Then why conspire with Gavin?" Aldric pressed, testing Roland's tip. Morgana's smile faltered, then returned sharper. "Roland's tongue wags, does it? Gavin and I spoke of trade, not treason. He's ambitious, not murderous." She sipped her cup, her eyes daring him to challenge her. Aldric's mind raced. Hemlock was subtle, slow, unlike the dagger's swift strike. Could Morgana have poisoned the wine, with another delivering the blade? He needed the chalice itself. The guards parted as he approached the dais where the relic now sat, flanked by steel and suspicion. Up close, its craftsmanship was unearthly, rubies set in patterns like constellations, the gold etched with runes he couldn't read. He lifted it, feeling a faint warmth, and turned it over. A seam ran along the base, barely visible. With a twist, it clicked open, revealing a hollow compartment. Inside lay a vial, stoppered with wax, its contents a dark, viscous red. Blood? Poison? He pocketed it, heart pounding. This was the key Isolde meant, but to what? A shout broke his focus. Prince Cedric stormed into the hall, his face ashen. "Father Zil," he cried. He clutched his chest and fell, minutes ago. Aldric's blood ran cold. The king's goblet in the solar, had Morgana been there before him? He raced back, finding Edwin sprawled on the floor, gasping, his lips tinged blue. "Wine," the king rasped. Aldric smelled it, bitter like Isolde's breath. Poison, not a fit. Morgana's cup flashed in his memory. She'd played him, distracting him while the king drank death. He ordered the guards to seize her, but she'd vanished from the gallery. The vial burned in his pocket as Cedric knelt by his father, sobbing. The chalice's curse, the prophecy, the land shall weep, felt less like superstition now. Morgana was a step ahead, but Aldric had her scent. The game wasn't over. The solar was a tableau of chaos as Sir Aldric Veyne knelt beside King Edwin, the king's labored breaths rattling like dry leaves. Prince Cedric clutched his father's hand, tears streaking his face, while guards shouted orders and physicians rushed in with herbs and leeches. Aldric's mind was a storm, Lady Morgana's vanishing, the poisoned wine, the vial from the Crimson Chalice. He pressed the king's wrist, feeling a weak pulse. "Hold on, sire," he murmured, though hope was a fragile thread. He rose, barking at a guard, "Find Morgana now." The man saluted and ran, but Aldric knew she'd be a ghost in the castle's labyrinth. He turned to the vial, pulling it from his tunic. The dark liquid within gleamed like liquid ruby, its wax seal unbroken. Was it the poison source, or something else? He needed answers, and the crypt where Isolde's note had pointed called him back. Leaving Cedric to tend the king, he slipped away, the chalice's weight a silent companion in his thoughts. The crypt was colder now, the air thick with the scent of earth and decay. Aldric lit a torch and approached the plinth, its moon and star carvings stark in the flame's glow. He placed the chalice atop it, aligning the runes with the symbols. A faint click echoed, and the plinth's surface slid aside, revealing a shallow recess. Inside lay a scroll, brittle with age, its edges crumbling. He unrolled it carefully, deciphering the faded script. "To the bearer of the chalice, the blood of the first binds the land. Spill it unjustly, and the curse awakens. Restore it, and the shadow lifts." Aldric's breath caught. The vial, was it the first king's blood, preserved as a relic? Isolde's murder, Edwin's poisoning, were they triggering the prophecy? Footsteps interrupted his reverie, soft but deliberate. He turned, dagger drawn, as Sir Gavin emerged from the shadows, his sword gleaming. "You've meddled too far, Veyne," he sneered. "Morgana sends her regards." Aldric parried as Gavin lunged, steel clashing in the crypt's confines. "Why?" Aldric grunted, dodging a thrust. Gavin's laugh was bitter. "Power. Morgana promised me a duchy if I helped her topple Cedric's line. Isolde was a nuisance. Edwin, a necessity." The fight was brutal, Gavin's skill honed by years of combat. But Aldric was faster, smarter. He feinted left, then drove his dagger into Gavin's shoulder, sending the knight crashing against a tomb. "Where's Morgana?" Aldric demanded, pressing the blade deeper. Gavin spat blood. "Tower, west wing. She's got Torrin with her." Aldric bound Gavin's hands with his own belt and left him groaning, racing for the tower. The west wing was a maze of stairs and corridors, its silence broken by a faint chant. Aldric followed it to a chamber atop the highest turret, where Morgana stood before an altar, the crescent pendant from Torrin's theft around her neck. Sir Torrin flanked her, eyes wide with zeal, a chalice, not the crimson one, but a crude copy before them. Morgana turned, her smile venomous. "You're too late, Aldric. The old faith rises. The king's death seals it." Aldric drew his sword. "The vial's blood, it's the cure, isn't it?" Morgana's eyes flickered. "Clever, but you'll never reach him." Torrin charged, blade swinging, but Aldric sidestepped, striking him down with a hilt to the skull. Morgana lunged with a dagger, hemlock on her breath, but Aldric caught her wrist, twisting until she dropped it. He pinned her against the wall, the vial clutched tight. "The game's mine," he said, and ran. The Solar was a fragile sanctuary as Sir Aldric Veyne burst through the door, the vial of ancient blood trembling in his grip. King Edwin lay motionless on the floor, his chest still, his face a mask of gray. Prince Cedric knelt beside him, his golden curls damp with sweat, his voice a broken plea. "He's gone, Aldric. You're too late." The physicians hovered like carrion birds, their mutterings of lost hope filling the room. But Aldric refused to yield. He dropped to his knees, prying open the king's jaw with one hand and breaking the vial's wax seal with the other. The dark liquid, thick, metallic, alive with the weight of centuries, poured into Edwin's mouth, staining his lips like a final anointing. Silence stretched, taut and unbearable. Then a shudder, a ragged inhale. Edwin's eyes snapped open, wild and unseeing, before focusing on Aldric. Color crept back into his cheeks, slow as dawn over the Blackthorn Mountains. Cedric gasped, clutching his father's hand as the king coughed, spitting blood and venom onto the floor. What have you done?" Edwin croaked, his voice a shadow of its former thunder. Aldric exhaled, relief warring with weariness. "The chalice's blood," he said. "It was the cure, the first king's legacy." The king struggled to sit, aided by Cedric as Aldric pieced together the night's unraveling. Morgana's ambition to resurrect the old faith, Gavin's greed-fueled betrayal, Torrin's blind devotion, and the scroll's cryptic promise. Restore it, and the shadow lifts. The blood had purged the poison. Defying the curse Isolde's murder had set in motion. Edwin's gaze hardened. "Morgana," he growled. "Where is she?" Aldric met his eyes. "Captured. The tower. She'll face justice." The reckoning came at sunrise. In the courtyard, beneath a sky streaked with gold and ash, Morgana stood bound, her midnight gown tattered, her defiance unbroken. Sir Gavin, bloodied from their crypt clash, glared beside her, his shoulder wrapped in makeshift bandages. Sir Torrin, head bowed, knelt apart, his zeal extinguished by the night's cost. The assembled court, knights, nobles, servants, watched in hushed awe as King Edwin, leaning on Cedric, descended the steps. His voice, though weak, carried steel. "For treason, murder, and blasphemy, you are condemned. Let the realm see its shadows purged." Morgana's laugh cut the air, sharp and unrepentant. "You think this ends it? The chalice's power lives beyond me." Aldric stepped forward, the crimson chalice in his hands, its rubies catching the light. "It's done," he said, placing it on a stone table. "Your curse dies with you." The executioner's axe fell thrice. Gavin, then Morgana, then silence. Torrin, spared by Edwin's mercy, was banished to the northern wilds, a living penance. The kingdom exhaled. Cedric's betrothal to the Valkrothian princess was reaffirmed, a bridge to peace forged in blood and trust. The chalice returned to its guarded dais, its secrets sealed anew. Aldric stood alone on the castle's highest turret as the sun climbed, bathing Dunraven in warmth. The conspiracy was crushed, the clues deciphered, yet a question lingered in the wind's whisper. Had the chalice's full mystery been laid bare, or did it wait, patient and eternal, for another hand to spill its crimson truth?